seated. The record will show the presence of the jury, the defendant, and all counsel. Mr. Martinez, you may continue.
Madam, you, as part of this investigation, you spoke to the defendant about the events involving June 4th of 2008 and her killing of Mr. Alexander, correct?
Correct.
And in fact, one of the things that she told you with regard to that was that he berated her about the camera, and that he was in the shower, and that when he came out, she got scared and she ran because he was chasing her, correct?
Yes, that he was chasing her.
The other thing that she told you was that she grabbed the gun, she knew where the gun was, and she said that she believed that the gun was, she did not believe that the gun was loaded, correct?
Correct.
And finally, we talked to her about the events involving the shooting and the fact that it involved an unloaded gun, and talked to her about the shooting, and she said she pulled the trigger, right?
Correct.
And when she pulled the trigger, she indicated to you that they were both in the closet, correct?
I believe so.
Well, would you like to listen to your statement to refresh your recollection?
Sure.
Okay.
Chairman, can I see that transcript, please?
Yes.
All right, let's go ahead and play it so that you can listen to it.
Okay.
Refreshes your recollection.
So she doesn't think it's loaded, and but she gets the gun anyway, right?
Yes.
And then she decides to pull the trigger, right?
You know, I think when you're in that state...
No, I'm not asking you what you think. I'm asking you what happened, okay?
Well, you're asking me to say what she thinks.
No, I'm asking you to say what she said.
She
did. She did.
She said that she pulled the trigger.
Okay, so she pulls the trigger, all right?
And
Where does she say Mr. Alexander is when she pulls the trigger?
that they're both in the closet.
They're both in the closet, all right?
According to you, when you spoke to the defendant, they were both in the closet when she pulled the trigger, correct?
Correct.
Part of that same conversation, there was a discussion involving the knife, correct?
Correct.
And the knife was used to cut the ropes after they engaged in this sexual encounter, correct?
I think before they engaged in a sexual encounter.
All right, well then let's take a look at your notes to see if this refreshes your recollection as to when the knife was used. Take a look at exhibit number 617.
Yes.
Those are your notes, correct?
Correct.
And they do reference the knife, don't they?
Yes, they say.
Hold on. Please don't read it if I can have it back.
Did you want me to read more than just the top paragraph?
Go ahead and read everything, and then let me know when you're done. So isn't it true that she told you that the knife was used to cut the ropes after he did oral sex on her, correct?
That he used it to cut the rope, and they had sex while she was tied to the bed.
And that knife was left on the nightstand, right?
I'm not sure where it was.
Let me show you your notes. Take a look at exhibit 618, read it, and see if that refreshes your recollection where the knife was left, per her account. Isn't it true that she told you that the knife was left on the nightstand?
Yes.
Ma'am, we've been talking about a conversation that occurred, or at least we've talked in the past, about a conversation that occurred on May 26th of 2008 between the defendant and Mr. Alexander. Do you remember that conversation? I know there were not many, there was at least an instant messaging conversation. Do you remember that?
Yes.
There was also a text messaging conversation involving that,
Yes.
whatever it is that they talked about, correct?
Yes.
And May 26th of 2008 is 2 days before May 28th of 2008, correct?
Correct.
And during this conversation that they had, exhibit number 450, Mr. Alexander indicates certain things about her. He indicates that you are a sociopath.
Objection as to indicates what's written.
Sustained.
It is written, you are a sociopath, correct?
Yes.
And it is also written there, you only cry for yourself.
Correct.
There's no reason to believe that he wasn't telling the truth there, is there?
Objection.
Mr. Alexander's knowledge as to psychological diagnosis.
Overruled. They're having an argument.
We understand that they're having an argument, but you've told us before is that you can go behind the words. Do you remember telling us that you could go behind the words involving the journal?
I remember you telling me I went behind the words.
Well, are you saying...
I remember, they're having an argument here, so names that are called, there's a series of names that are called. I don't know that I believe all the names that she's been called, so him calling her a sociopath is in keeping with the kind of names he calls her.
What are you saying in terms of whether or not you believe what is being written here? You're the one that indicated that when you looked at the journals, you could go behind the journals, that what's written in the journal when it was involved the defendant, and tell us what was going on behind there. Can you tell us anything about what's going on behind his words when he makes, or the statements are indicated, you have never cared out me, and you have betrayed me worse than any example I could conjure up. You are sick, and you have scammed me.
I read a lot of rage behind those words.
And so he's upset at her, correct?
Correct.
And it could be that he has a good reason to be upset with her, right?
Objection second.
He could have a good reason, he just goes over the top, Mr. Martinez.
So the answer is yes, he could have a good reason, right?
Not a good reason to say the things he says, a good reason to be angry, which is a very different thing.
You don't know what he was angry about, do you?
It doesn't matter what somebody's angry about if they're using a lot of vitriolic words to describe someone. That's a very different thing. Everybody has a right to be angry. It's what you do when you get there that makes a difference.
So what you're saying is that you really don't know why he was angry with regard to this conversation, right?
No, I don't.
And in fact, again, this conversation was 2 days before May 28th of 2008, correct?
Correct.
At the bottom, it reads, I don't want your apology. I want you to understand what I think of you. That's what it says, right?
Correct.
It also indicates that I want you to understand how evil I think you are, correct?
Yes.
And then it ends it by saying, at least that box, you are the worst thing that ever happened to me, correct?
Correct.
And that is true in this case, isn't it?
Objection. Argument is.
Sustained.
Move to strike, please.
Granted. Jury, this is our last question.
May we approach, Your Honor?
Judgment reapproach.
Well, you told us that, at least with regard to the journals, that you can go behind the journals and tell us what is really being said when something is written down. Right?
I said that unlimited excerpts that you gave me. I didn't say that about everything.
Well, this is a limited excerpt that I'm talking to you about, right here. This one on May 28th of 2008, May 26th of 2008. This very small excerpt that I'm talking to you about. You indicated, for example, in the journal entry of January 24th of 2008, where the defendant said nothing of any note happened, nothing noteworthy happened, you said, well, that's not true. And you went behind the words with regard to that, didn't you?
No, I didn't.
Well, didn't you tell us that at that point you did believe that there had been this incident of physical abuse on January 22nd of 2008?
I did say that.
Even though it was written that that hadn't happened?
Even though it was written that that didn't happen,
Right.
yes.
You still went...
Objection is to mischaracterization.
It was not written, doesn't mean it didn't happen.
Overruled.
And so, ma'am, with regard to this, you are the worst thing that ever happened to me. You're not telling me that you're going to go behind that and tell us that that means something else than what is written there, are you?
I'm looking at all three boxes, Mr.
Ma'am, I'm not asking you about the three boxes.
I'm looking at context, Mr.
And I'm not
Mr.
asking you to look at the three
Martinez.
boxes. Can you just look?
One at a time. Mr. Martinez, finish your question. Ms. LaViolette, wait for a response.
I'm asking you to look at the one box only. Do you understand that?
I understand that.
And with regard to that one box, And that one box only, and with regard to the statement, you are the worst thing that ever happened to me. You're not going to tell me that you can go behind that and tell me that there's a different meaning to that phrase, are you?
Double negative.
Overruled. You may answer.
I'm going to tell you that I can't take one box and make an assessment on it.
Objection, non-responsive.
The answer will stand.
I don't have any other questions there.
All right, redirect. You may.
And have there been studies done to help understand why this happens, why there is this phenomenon of people who have been battered and abused, why they act differently than somebody who has not been battered and abused?
There's numerous studies and numerous books.
Okay, and so numerous studies and numerous books, and because there are these studies and books, is that what has added to the knowledge about battered women syndrome?
Yes, that and the voices of battered women who've been interviewed over time, over the last, since the mid-'70s when actually people started talking about it at all.
Okay. You were talked about your continuum. Now, the continuum that you created or took part in creating, and I'm showing you exhibit number 558. At the top, it has exacerbating factors, right?
Correct.
And what does that mean?
That means factors that can make one sort of abusive kind of behavior more extreme.
Okay. And so when we talk about family of origin, what does that mean with regard to exacerbating factors?
That what you grow up in, what your family's like, is like the Columbia School of Emotions. Basically, it's where you learn about who you are. It's where you learn about how to treat other people, and that they have those parents or those guardians or whoever raised you have an incredible impact on what you do later. And in fact, most of us who have children would be able to say that
Relevance to her specific situation.
Next question.
Judge, I would like her to finish her answer.
Question, and she can finish what she's saying.
Okay, in fact, you were saying something about their children?
that when we grow up and we have our own children, that oftentimes what happens is things that we say that we would never say or do, we do sort of by rote because we grew up with that, and it's almost an emotional reflex.
And so what happens when, is there a difference between, or a correlation, I guess, between somebody who comes from a severely abusive home versus somebody who comes from a home that has some abuse in it?
Yes.
What's the correlation? What do you see?
Well, in the research by Amy Holdsworth Monroe and Gregory Stewart, and also in the anecdotal research that we have with people who do the work, the people who come from the worst kinds of violence in their families of origin tend to be the people who have the hardest time dealing in intimate relationships and can be the most abusive. There tends to be a positive correlation. That's not always true, but it tends to be more true, particularly if the person hasn't ever gotten help or any intervention for it.
So, and I think you just touched on this, does that mean that just because a person grows up in an abusive family home that they will turn out to be a batterer themselves?
Not necessarily.
Okay. But if they grow up in an abusive family home, the more abusive it is, the more difficult it is for that person to overcome the abuse that they suffered as a child?
Correct.
You were asked questions about Miss Arias's childhood. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And questions about her father and some of the hitting that went on with her mother to Jodi, right?
Yes.
How can you draw a comparison for us as to what you know, based on what you've read from Mr. Alexander's words, about his childhood?
Objection, beyond the scope.
Overruled.